Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I just got done listening to the House Financial Service Committee hearing on using the Fed account and digital tools. This was basically a hearing that had to talk about basically like the system, the implementation, the use cases, the reasonings for a central bank digital currency. And it was about an hour and a half long or so, and it was pretty decent. Now, they covered a lot of topics on it. For example, the reasonings for this whole Fed account or central bank digital currency. And I guess probably like the major thing different between a digital currency and like the money that we use right now is that the digital currency is something that doesn't leave the system. And a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their head around it when it comes to digital currencies, because they think, okay, well, I have a credit card, that's a digital currency. And in a sense, yes, it is. The difference is that when you make a transaction, like you're down at the store, you make a transaction using your credit card, what's happening is that your credit card is going through a banking process that's talking with another bank, like a mediator, and then making the transaction to another bank. So it's like these steps that take place in order to facilitate that trade. The central bank digital currency would be an interaction. Pretty much, it's not going to be peer-to-peer in the sense like Bitcoin is peer-to-peer, but it would be a transaction that doesn't go through a bunch of like different banking systems. It's a Fed account swap, essentially. It would be accounts at the Federal Reserve, and they just take and just basically transfer the money from one account to the other instead of going through a banking system. And now, I guess the benefits to that would be speed. Would be like the number one thing, if you could do it in real time. So like a lot of people who do like a bank transfer or something, it could take like 3-4 days for that bank transfer to take place. Like you want to transfer money from one bank to another or one account to another account. A lot of times you can take like I said, up to 4 days for this to take place. So it would eliminate things like that. Now, the big like reasonings that they were saying was for the banking and the underbanked. And I just have a hard time like understanding this one, because like if you're unbanked or underbanked, there are so many opportunities out there, especially with the internet and smartphone capabilities, if you have one, to download apps, banking apps that can do all the things that a traditional bank can do, except for give you like, you can't go there and cash a check because there's no place to go. So I've pretty much since the lockdown have not gone into a bank. I mean, our banks are closed. You can't even go to them. You have to go to a little machine that's a virtual teller where you can communicate with somebody, but it's not like you go into a bank and sit down and do business like you used to. I mean, I'm sure you can set up appointments to do stuff like that, but there's no, like, you just can't go to the counter and deal with your banking needs. You have to do it through an app, or you have to do it through a virtual teller, or you have to set up an appointment. And I mean, all I really do with my bank is cash my paycheck and pay my bills with it. Like, that's all I really have my banking account for. I don't have any loans. I don't have anything going on with my bank. And when I started looking into PayPal or Venmo or Cash App, I mean, all these things essentially do the same thing my bank account does, that my traditional bank was, my credit union that I go through. There's really no difference between them. I mean, I have the same, debit or credit cards and stuff like that. So there's like being unbanked or underbanked because there's no facility around to deal with your banking needs. I'm missing it. Like I'm not seeing that, because you don't really need a facility anymore. Now, I guess it is like expensive to try and pull cash out of an ATM, and like my bank location is still there. I can go and use the ATM and pull cash out and not be charged anything for it. So I guess like there is that sense that if you don't want to be charged for pulling your money out of the banking system and you don't have a bank to go to, then yeah, I guess there is that argument that every time you pull cash out you have to pay a fee. But for the most part, I'm noticing a lot of people don't even want to use cash. I mean, most people are just using their debit cards, especially the younger generation. They really don't, seem to carry a whole lot of cash. Most of them, you just use a debit card or credit card. So that argument that they use for having a digital currency is to help the underbanked or the unbanked, because they can give these people like a debit card just like anything else, and they can load it anywhere. Like, it's just like automatically loaded with stimulus, or it's automatically loaded from your paycheck, or however you want to work it. It's not like something that you have to like go and deal with or something like that. It's just like, again, I'm having a hard time like, wrapping my head around underbanked as one of the arguments, but I'm trying to understand that argument. Anyway, they continue on with talking about how China is ahead of the game with this, and they have actually implemented a digital currency, and they're using it, and they're paying their people like 25% of their wages inside of the central bank digital currency, the digital yuan. And there's like, I was reading an article about how there's these South Korean companies, merchants out there who would be like, hey man, I'll totally take digital yuan. They have no problems with it, because like any business, if you're a business person, you're going to want to take any form of payment if they're willing to pay it to do the transaction, because it's all about doing transaction. So yeah, the digital yuan is way ahead of the game, and the United States needs to play catch up in a sense that they have not yet implemented a digital currency that is in practical use yet. Although they do have the FedNow accounts, which is very similar to having the digital currency thing, but it's like it's not implemented for everybody to use. So but the biggest thing, right, was like in the arguments was the cashless society. How do you keep this from going to a cashless society? And I just think, honestly, that once people start using the digital currency, that they just simply won't want to have cash. But we already know that the IMF has already stated about how they are going to deal with the cash in the system, and that is by implementing a negative interest rates on your bank account. So people will be forced to want to take their cash out instead of having it in this digital currency. But then they'll devalue cash to the digital currency, forcing everybody to bring their cash in order to get the digital currency to keep from having it devalued. So if you kind of have a loss on following that, the IMF, I don't know, about a year and a half ago or so, put out a piece of paper. They put out a paper or writing or a blog or something. I'll leave a link down in the description for you guys. But they were saying that if you want to take a society cashless and negative interest rates, or if you want to take a economy into negative interest rates, you have to go cashless, because people are just going to pull their cash out of the system if their bank account has a negative interest rate attached to it. So what the IMF has said is that you create two currencies. You got the cash, like everybody knows and understands, and then you have e-currency, which is what these central banks are talking about when they talk about their central bank digital currency. They're talking about e-currency. It's a currency that's separate from the cash. And what you do is that when people deposit money in the bank, they deposit it in e-currency. And then you put in a negative interest rate attached to that, and then devalue the cash to the e-currency, which would force people to put their cash into e-currency before they lose the value of it. So that's like kind of the long story. I'm sure it would take years for that to play out. So first it would just start with like the e-currency. People would understand it, use it just like they would traditional cash. And then as time goes on, they're going to start, implementing the lower interest rates on that, or the devaluation of cash to the e-currency. Anyhow, that's kind of what the IMF is talked about as far as getting a digital currency in, but not one mention of that was done during this congressional hearing. It was pretty much them talking about stimulus, how to spread stimulus around, the underbanked, and a little bit of like staying ahead of China and going into a cashless society. Now, what I found interesting is that after I listened to that, I thought about an article I was reading from the Treasury that says that those guys have stockpiled a bunch of cash. So all this stimulus packages that they have passed and pretty much like said this is the deficit that we're going into, has sold a lot of treasuries out there. Now the Federal Reserve picked up a lot of them, but investors picked up even more. And that money is now sitting in the coffers over at the Treasury. So typically the Treasury would want to keep, well, if you go and look at the Fed chart of this, the Federal Reserve charts that they do, and I'll leave a link down in the description for it, it's pretty incredible. It's called the Treasury General Account. And if you look at the balance sheet of that thing, you would find that like for the longest time, the Treasury balance sheet had like $200 billion on it. It was a lot, but it wasn't that much. And then it jumped up to around $400 billion. and now it's at 1.6 trillion. It went from 400 billion to 1.6 trillion in a matter of a few months. So something is definitely going on there. Now, it was part of the stimulus packages where they sold off all this, debt, essentially a bunch of it to the Federal Reserve and a bunch of it to investors out there around the world. And they got a bunch of this money. Now they haven't spent it, they're holding on to it. Now, last time I thought about the Treasury General account and having having a high balance sheet was back in September when the corporate tax payment were due, and it sent a lot of payments to the Treasury, which pulled a lot of liquidity out of the banking system, which kicked in the repo market. And that was at 400 billion. Right now, the Treasury's sitting at 1.6 trillion dollars, almost 4 times that amount. And then I read an article about how the Fed is talking about their repo operations, and they were keeping interest rates on the repo market at the same as the interest on excess reserves from the big banks. So when the big banks deposit money with the Federal Reserve, the interest that they collect on it is called interest on excess reserves. And so they're, supposed to have a certain amount of reserves on hand. This is traditionally, they've actually told them that they don't have to have reserves and all kinds of stuff, but traditionally they would have interest on excess reserves. And so whatever interest they made beyond the amount that they were required to have on hand was deposited with the Federal Reserve, and they would collect an interest with that. The overnight repo rate was matching that. Whatever that was, the overnight repo rate was matching it. Well, they've disconnected that now. And I can only assume is because that money that was sitting at the Treasury is no longer going to be in the Treasury. It's going to be flowing into the banking system at some point. Even Steve Mnuchin was saying that we got a lot more stimulus to go. And they're figuring out why the ways to spend it. Here's this hearing committee talking about the digital coin or central bank digital currency being implemented, and the reason for it is mainly because of the stimulus in the underbanked or unbanked, or however you want to determine it. So the Federal Reserve, I have a feeling, is foreseeing that money flowing into the system. And once it starts getting in there, the liquidity is going to fill the banking system. Once the banking system is full of liquidity, they won't need the overnight repo like they once did. At least that's kind of what I'm gathering from it. Now, one of the other things that I found interesting is that after I read those articles, it led me to thinking about, well, what about that article about the Pentagon, who has done a strategic planning to deal with a Bitcoin rebellion. And they call it from the Generation Z, the Z-bellion. And this is where I guess the people get upset with, the fact that their currency is no longer free and that it's tied up with the banking system and could possibly be turned on and off at a switch. They're going to rebel against that and get into digital currencies. And the Pentagon has a plan to deal with this, or at least they have a strategic planning to deal with this. I found all this stuff very interesting when I started thinking about it. I put all those pieces together, and it just kind of leads me to believe that that is going to definitely happen, and that the Federal Reserve is going to be implementing that digital currency soon. I can only assume it's going to be sometime around the July mark, because they even said that they were going to hold off on doing any more stimulus, and I think this is wise because they want to get the details of this thing done up and ready to implement. Now, before I let you guys go, at least on that part, I got some mail to open up. I only got 2 packages today, but I'm really thankful for you guys for that. But before I let you guys go on the news part of it, Larry Kudlow says there is no second spike coming. So if Larry Kudlow says it, you know what I think. Okay, so no second spike. Good to know. Got some mail here to open up for you guys. Got 2 packages. One of them looks like it's from UFO Engines, and he didn't draw his little pictures all over it, but I'm sure it's him. I want to thank you guys for the PayPal donations. I'm not sure. I've gotten a few of them over the last couple of weeks, and one of them was really significant. It was $100 tip, and I tell you, I was so touched by that, and I really appreciate it, guys. I mean, I get a lot of emails from you guys, and I love reading every one of them, and sometimes I don't get to answer back to all of them. A lot of times I can't answer all the comments in the comments section. I do try and read all of them. I read all the emails. I try to respond as I can. I want to be, give you guys thoughtful responses when I do. But it's been pretty busy out here lately, and I've been trying to keep myself busy with other things around the house and the family and stuff like that. So, but I really appreciate all the support. I get a lot of emails from those people who want me to pitch their product at the beginning of my videos, and I noticed that a lot of YouTubers are starting to do that. And I tell you, I had an offer today that seemed really good, and I don't want to push any product that I don't trust for myself or use, and I don't intend to start now. But I tell you, when they said that it was like $500 to to have access to you guys, the audience, I thought, man, that's pretty nice. But I'm independent. I figure that I will stay independent. You guys support me the best you can with all the likes and comments and sharing of the videos, all that stuff. That totally helps. It helps support the channel, and it helps support my enthusiasm to keep going. So this is from John. We'll just call him John from Spokane. And right on, a Euro-Irish pence for good luck. Right on. Oh, thanks, brother. That is so cool. Yeah, let me see. I don't know if I'm covering up anything, but yeah, he sent me this coin from my coin collection. Very nice, John. Thank you so much. It says, best wishes, keep up the great work, and I'll see you on the other side. Oh, wow, he's got a big letter here. It says, greetings, UE. Well, I hope I can get through all this. I have followed your channel for as long as I can remember. I have also appreciated you talking a very complicated subject, the economy and finance, and explaining it in very simplistic terms. A true layman's perspective. With all due respect, I call truth the moniker uneducated economist is so far from the truth. I find you to be one of the most valuable and most valuable and most honest voice on YouTube. You're smart and you speak honestly from your experiences and perspective. I feel that I have certain aspects common with you. I have been in customer service for over 35 years, and I have watched the ebbs and flows of our society as the public responds to it, both positive and not so positive. My most valuable education has been international travel. Mine too. The few times that I've traveled out of the country, I gained a lot of knowledge about how people live, how people treat one another. There's a lot to learn from traveling outside this country. I agree. Always on a budget, usually carrying a bag over my shoulder, living with enjoying other people and their culture, and learning valuable qualities about myself. Yeah. So here's my perspective. Here lies the challenge. Will forever about George Floyd continues, in some cases rightfully so. We are being lied to about the economy, with riots persist in countless cities across the nation. Everything political is pointing a finger in another direction. While a large number of people march and protest for one cause or another, the telephone poles continue to be erected with 5G right under their heads. Planetary control is underway, while the ants scurry from one sugar cube to the next. All the while, a cloud of poison is being sprayed overhead to control, manipulate, and monitor. People are too occupied with a cause and asleep to the agenda. I am observing this while I drive around my city as a transit driver. The economy is just one domino about to fall. Thank you for all you do. Best wishes. Keep up the great work, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you, John. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your perspective on telling us too. I think that's interesting thoughts there. There we go. All right, so it's a big, heavy one, and I'm sure this is from UFO engines, because he always writes some of the coolest stuff on here. So, like on this side, it says, "Howdy, UE. Have you thought about running for president? If you Google A, how to run for president in 4 easy steps, B, the FEC form." And it says you can fill it out online, and then Wikipedia, third party, United States. You will find that these sites will help you get started. Run for president, UE for president. I don't know. Glue on there too, huh? Alright, that's getting hard to open. Alright. I figured it should have been UFO engines. Giant redwood? Is that what that is? Yosemite National Park. He always sends me these postcards. Wow. The power paradox. How we gain and lose influence. Whistle Stop, my favorite stories from presidential campaign history. I really need to start reading more. Who's that? Robert Gottlieb? Avid reader. Wild Nights. No letter to go with it, but I'm sure that's UFO engines. I can tell by the handwriting. Right on, guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything you guys do for the channel. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.